Currently, Earth. August 20th, 1619. 20 and odd Angolans, kidnapped by the Portuguese, arrived in the British colony of Virginia and are then brought by the English colonists. The arrival of the enslaved Africans in the New World marks a beginning of 2.5 centuries of slavery in North America. Founded at Jamestown in 1607, the Virginia colony was home to about 700 people by 1619. The first enslaved Africans to arrive in Virginia disembarked at Point Comfort, in what is today known as Hampton Roads. Most of their names, as well as the exact number who remained at Point Comfort, have been lost to history, but much is known about their journey. They were originally kidnapped by Portuguese colonial forces, who sent captured members of the native Congo and Ndongo kingdoms on a forced march to the port of Luanda, the capital of modern-day Angola. From there, they were ordered on the ship San Juan Bautista, which set sail for Veracruz in the colony of New Spain. As was quite common, about 150 of the 350 captives aboard the ship continued their eternity during the crossing. Then, as it approached its destination, the ship was attacked by 2 privateer ships, the White Lion and the Treasurer. Crews from the 2 ships kidnapped up to 60 of the Batista's enslaved people. It was the White Lion which docked at Virginia's colony Point Comfort and traded some of the prisoners for food on August 20th in 1619. Scholars note that the arrivals were technically sold as indentured servants. Indentured servants agreed, or in many cases were forced, to work with no pay for a set amount of time, often to pay off a debt, and could legally expect to become free at the end of the contract. Many Europeans who arrived in the Americas came as indentured servants. Despite this classification and records which indicate that some of them did eventually obtain their freedom, it is clear that the Africans arriving at Port Comfort in 1619 were forced into servitude, and that they fit the Universal Declaration on Human Rights definition of enslaved peoples. The arrival at Port Comfort marked a new chapter in the history of the transatlantic slave trade, which began in the early 1500s and continued into the mid-1800s. The trade uprooted roughly 12 million Africans, depositing roughly 5 million in Brazil and over 3 million in the Caribbean. Though the number of Africans brought to mainland North America was relatively small, roughly 400,000, their labor and that of their descendants was crucial to the economies of the British colonies and later right here in the US of A. 2 of the Africans who arrived aboard the White Lion, Antonio and Isabella, became servants of Captain William Tucker, commander of Point Comfort. Their son William is the first known African child to have been born in America, and under the law of the time, he was born a free man. In the coming decades, however, slavery became codified. Servants of African origin were oftentimes forced to continue working after the end of their contract, and in 1640, a Virginia court sentenced rebellious servant John Punch to a lifetime of slavery. With fewer white indentured servants arriving from England, a racial caste system developed, and African servants were increasingly held for life. In 1662, a Virginia court ruled that children born to enslaved mothers were the property of the mother's owner. As cash crops like tobacco, cotton, and sugar became pillars of the colonial economy, slavery became its engine. Though the slave trade was outlawed in 1807, chattel slavery and the plantation economy it made possible flourished in the South. The 1860 census found that there were 3,953,760 enslaved people in the United States, making up roughly 13% of the total population. Conflict between abolitionists and those who wanted to preserve and spread slavery was a major catalyst in the outbreak of the Civil War. Our nation's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln, formally freed enslaved people in the South with the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, although it was not until the passage of the 13th Amendment in 1865 that slavery was formally abolished in the United States. In the end, 246 brutal years of slavery had an incalculable effect on American society. It would take another century after the Civil War for racial segregation to be declared unconstitutional, but the end of state-sanctioned racism was by no means the end of racism and discrimination in our country. Because it became a crucial part of the culture and economy of early America after its introduction in Jamestown, slavery is often referred to as our nation's original sin. On August 20th in 1804, Sergeant Charles Floyd continues his eternity 3 months into the voyage of Meriwether Lewis and William Clark, becoming the only casualty of the Corps of Discovery. Lewis and Clark left St. Louis the previous May, heading up the Missouri River with a party of 35 men called the Corps of Discovery. Among the voyagers was Charles Floyd, a native of Kentucky who had enlisted in the U.S. military a few years earlier. When word went out asking for volunteers to join the ambitious expedition across the continent to the Pacific, Floyd was among the first to apply. Young, vigorous, and better educated than most of the soldiers, Floyd was a natural choice. The two co-captains not only selected him to join the mission, they promoted him to sergeant. Sadly, Floyd's part in the great voyage of the Corps of Discovery was short-lived. By late July, Lewis and Clark reported that Floyd, quote, has been very sick for several days, unquote. He seemed to grow better for a time, but on August 15th fell ill. The illness grew severe during the evening of August 19th, and Clark sat up with the suffering man almost the entire night. Floyd continued his eternity in the early afternoon of this day, reportedly with a good deal of composure. The members of the expedition buried his body on a high bluff overlooking a river that flowed into the Missouri, affixing a red cedar post with his name, title, and date of death over the grave. Lewis read the funeral service, and the two captains concluded the ceremony by naming the nearby stream Floyd's River and naming the hill Floyd's Bluff. Lewis and Clark regretted that their limited wilderness and medical skills were inadequate to cure the young soldier. Yet even if Floyd had been in Philadelphia, the best doctors of the day would likely have been unable to save him. Based on the symptoms described by Lewis and Clark, modern physicians have concluded that Floyd was probably suffering from acute appendicitis. On their triumphant return journey from the Pacific in 1806, Lewis and Clark stopped to pay their respects at Sergeant Floyd's grave. Amazingly, Floyd's was the only death at the Corps of Discovery suffered in more than 2 years of dangerous wilderness travel. On August 20th in 1920, 7 men, including legendary all-around athlete and football star Jim Thorpe, met to organize a professional football league at the Jordan and Hupp Mobile Auto Showroom in Canton, Ohio. The meeting led to the creation of the American Professional Football Conference, or the APFC, the forerunner to the hugely successful NFL, or National Football League. Professional football developed in the 1890s in Pennsylvania as local athletic clubs engaged in increasingly intense competition. Former Yale football star William Pudge Heffelfinger became the first ever professional football player when he was hired by the Allegheny Athletic Association to play in a game against their rival, the Pittsburgh Athletic Club, in November of 1892. By 1896, the Allegheny Athletic Association was made up entirely of paid players, making it the sport's first ever professional team. As football became more and more popular, local, semi-pro, and pro teams were organized across the country. Professional football first proved itself a viable spectator sport in the 1910s with the establishment of the Ohio League. Canton, the premier team in the league, featured legendary decathlete and football star Jim Thorpe. From his play with the Carlisle School to his gold medal in the decathlon in Stockholm in 1912, and his time in the outfield with John McGraw's New York Giants, Thorpe was an international star who brought legitimacy to professional football. The crowds that Thorpe and the Canton team drew created a market for professional football in Ohio and beyond. Still, the league was struggling due to escalating player salaries, a reliance on college players who then had to forfeit their college eligibility, and just a general lack of organization. On August 20th of 1920, the owners of 4 Ohio League teams, the Akron Pros, Canton Bulldogs, the Cleveland Indians, and the Dayton Triangles, met to form a new professional league. Jim Thorpe was nominated as president of the new league, as it was hoped Thorpe's fame would help the league to be taken seriously. On September 17th, the league met again, changing its short-lived name to the American Professional Football Association and officially electing Jim Thorpe as the league's first president. The APFA began play on September 26 with the Rock Island Independents of Illinois defeating a team from outside the league, the St. Paul Ideals, 48-0. A week later, Dayton beat Columbus 14-0 in the first game between two teams from the APFA, the forerunner of the modern NFL. All historic information divulged and documented on this audio file can be verified on History.com.